Next from Springfield, members of the State University Annuitants Association hear an address by Professor Kent Redfield, who gives a behind-the-scenes analysis of the political power struggle taking place in state government and the impact that is having on finding a solution to the state's fiscal crisis. Professor Redfield has studied Illinois politics for over 30 years. This runs about 1 hour.
But Kent Redfield is a professor emeritus of political studies at the University of Illinois, Springfield, our own hometown UIS. Connected, of course, to the University of Illinois. We're the third campus. And I had the privilege of being on that campus when it went from Sangamon State to University of Illinois, Springfield. There have been a lot of changes, and Kent was part of all those changes. We all survived. My being a student and him being a professor. Our political studies here in Springfield are just really fantastic. We have a lot of students that come out of there who go to work at the Capitol. They serve as interns. I can't tell you that how proud I can say that Springfield is to have UIS on this campus and have leaders, professors like Kent Redfield. And since I've been a part of that and watched it over the years, I'm quite proud myself. Kent has research appointments with the Center for State Policy and Leadership at UIS and the University of Illinois Institute of Government and Public Affairs. He has a BA in Political Science from the University of Utah and an MA and PhD in Political Science from the University of Washington, Seattle. Prior to, wow, this is going way back, Kent. Prior to joining UIS in 1979, Dr. Redfield worked for 4 years as a member of the Research Appropriation Staff for the Speaker of the Illinois General Assembly. And I'm sure he has stories to tell. His primary assignment with the legislature was staffing the House local government committees. You will find him, if you Google him, a lot of places. He's done a lot of things. And in addition to his local government background in the legislature, Dr. Redfield has conducted research and published reports for the Taxpayers Federation of Illinois, where I came from, on tax increment financing, and conducted research and published reports on the Illinois Enterprise Zone program for the Institute for Public Affairs, now the Center for State and Policy and Leadership at the University of Illinois, Springfield. He's authored several books, one of those being the Illinois Politics: A Citizen's Guide, which was published in the summer of 2010 by the University of Illinois Press. Like I said, we all in Springfield, we all intertwine, we all have a lot of admiration, and Kent, it's your time at the podium. And I should say that his topic, as he's coming up here, is going to be, this will be good, policy making in Illinois, why the Democratic legislative leaders are powerful and the governor is not. Living up to low standards, political ethics, political reform, and political culture in Illinois. Good luck with that.
Thank you, Linda, very much. You too can be on TV and be quoted in the newspapers. If you return people's calls, be conscious of their deadlines, and work cheap. I can pretty much end my career on local TV by telling them that I want to start discussing my fee for so it's somewhat a labor of love. And yes, I did work for the General Assembly for the Speaker of the House. Speaker of the House was a guy named Bill Redmond. I think when I started, Jerry Ford was president, and Mike Madigan was an assistant majority leader. So that's a long time ago. But that was my education. I had a recently minted PhD in political science, but I had to come to Illinois and work for the General Assembly to learn something about politics. It certainly is an interesting place. And so I want to talk a little bit about political culture and the political process and corruption. And then I want to talk a little bit about policy making. And we'll talk pensions as kind of but I really want to talk the context in terms of why things happen or don't happen the way that they do in Springfield when we deal with really difficult issues like pensions. So, a guy is walking down the street in Las Vegas, and a guy comes up to him and he says, "I just got to town with my wife. My wife has taken ill. She needs medical care immediately. I need money in order to get an operation for my wife and to make her better. And can you please give me some money?" And the guy looks at him and says, "How do I know that you're not going to take that money that I give you and spend it on gambling rather than spend it on your wife?" And the guy looked back at him and said, "Oh, I already have money for gambling." Old joke, but I'm an old person. So life is about values and priorities and choices. And the same thing is true in terms of politics. So if you haven't noticed, Illinois has a pretty unique political culture. It's not the only example of the kind of political culture that we have, which political scientists have a name for, individualistic political culture. But this is about how we think about politics. What's good form? What's bad form? What does politics mean? How do we characterize it? How do we engage in it? And this is cultural. This is attitudes, opinions, and beliefs about politics. And you learn it at the breakfast table and in the newspapers and sometimes in the pews and in your experiences. And it's how you think about politics. And we think about politics very differently in Illinois than we do in some other states. When Wisconsin decided to deal with conflicts of interest in terms of gifts to legislators, they essentially adopted a zero tolerance policy. You cannot buy a cup of coffee for a legislator in Wisconsin if you're a lobbyist. In Illinois, when we adopted the gift ban after the scandal within the Edgar administration involving MSI, we adopted a gift ban that had an exemption for food and beverages consumed on the premises. That is wining and dining. And so if I give a lobbyist, it's now $75. If I give a lobbyist a lobster tail and a bottle of wine that's worth more than $75, take it to his apartment, the lobbyist takes it, then we have both broken the law. If I take the legislator to a restaurant and buy them a $75 meal, we have not broken the law. And if the restaurant is open after midnight, we can start all over again with another $75. Okay, so that's, Wisconsin, zero tolerance. You can't be a little bit pregnant kind of approach to ethics. Illinois, very different in terms of we like that area of gray in there. And so just quickly, in Illinois, the dominant culture, and this isn't everybody involved and engaged with politics. We have Richard J. Daley and we have Paul Simon. We have Rod Blagojevich and we have, now I'm blanking on the congressman. Okay, I should write these things down. It's not that they're there, it's just that I'm getting old. Paul Douglas. And so, but generally when we think about politics in Illinois, there's no public interest apart from the aggregate of individual self-interest. That's very different from saying there's a public interest that's apart from the way that the values and the interests of particular groups or people, that there is a public interest. And that goes to the ideas of public interest and good government. So when I was working on TIF district legislation, I got a lot of sins I have to make up. I worked on civic centers in McCormick Place, enterprise zones, and tax increment financing. I had a hand in creating all of those things. So I have got a lot of penance to do in terms of the impact I've had on the state. But we're having a discussion about tax increment financing, and one of the lobbyists, one of the people at the table started talking about the public interest and good government. And there was a lobbyist on there who was a former mayor, and finally he looked across the table and he said, "Sir, where I come from, good government is 6 votes on a Tuesday night. Because the city council is 10 members, it meets on Tuesday night. If you've got 6 votes, you've got good government." That's an attitude, that's a way of thinking about politics. And what that spreads, it's not any surprise that Illinois is a patronage state, a job state. This kind of attitude is that people who have power, who are elected to office, they are entitled to the benefits of office. Why did it take so long to give up legislative scholarships? Because that's mine, I'm entitled to that. There's an entitlement kind of mentality within Illinois politics. And those who gain power and authority are entitled to the benefits of their positions. Okay, the system, both the political system, in terms of the laws and the structures, both reflects and reinforces the culture. The election code is essentially a monopoly trade agreement between the 2 political parties designed to maintain the 2 political parties and discourage any kind of competition or entry into the system. It is anti-participation, anti-engagement. I think the total irony that Rob Emanuel almost didn't get to be mayor of Chicago because he didn't meet an arcane residency requirement. Those are the things we put in the election code to make sure that only the people that are insiders get to be get to engage in politics. So it's a very, let's make a deal, where's mine, distributive kind of politics. And it functions best when we've got a pie to cut up and everybody gets a piece of the pie. It's not a very good politics in terms of making tough choices or looking in terms of long-term future. The game is politics is for professionals in Illinois in terms of the attitudes of the insiders. When I worked for the legislature, the guys from Chicago would talk about the goo-goos and the plague of women voters. These are the dilettantes, the people who are engaged in politics for just kind of principle. They don't have any skin in the game. If I lose, my uncle loses his job. I got skin in the game. Politics is for serious people who are professionals. And so those kinds of attitudes are, again, not every Illinois politician, but there's an undercurrent, there's an element of the political culture that is clearly there. And then for the successful politician, the internal ethical benchmark is what can I get away with? Politics is a business, but that's not the whole phrase, the way we think about it in Illinois. It's not only politics is a business, politics is a dirty business. But if you cut corners as a businessman and get away with it, you're a smart businessman. If you cut corners as a politician and get away with it, you're a smart politician. There's a problem within the political system about the way that we think about and practice politics. It also means that from a policy standpoint, again, we like to cut up the pie. Everybody gets a piece of the action. It's a very risk-averse, status quo kind of politics. Because however we've gotten, whatever we're doing, we got into power. And if we change things, we could have the law of unintended consequences. There's risk involved with change. So a very status quo kind of conservative politics, not an ideologically kind of politics. And so it's not any, we have problems making policy. We also have huge problems in terms of political corruption because of the way that we think about and practice politics. And just quickly, political corruption is bad. Not only does it cost money to prosecute people, arrest them and prosecute them. Political corruption is bad because you get a loss of legitimacy of the political process for the citizens. If everybody believes that the system is rigged and everybody's corrupt, they don't accept the outcome of government, political decisions. And this is a time when we need everybody on board because we are in terrible shape fiscally. We've got huge problems. We need the citizens to trust and be engaged with government, and political corruption destroys that. Political corruption means that people don't participate, they don't get engaged, and that's the foundation of representative democracy is engaged, informed citizenship. But if your participation doesn't matter, if the game is rigged, if everybody's corrupt, why participate? I spend a lot of my time trying to get young people to participate in politics and to fight those kinds of attitudes. And you get a weakened talent pool in terms of people that are willing to engage in government, engage in careers of public service. Makes it harder to get the best and the brightest to work in the public sector. And you get a deterioration of state services because corrupt practices take resources away from services. And if you don't get the best and the brightest working for government, then you don't get the innovation and the kind of solutions and the people working on the problems that we have. So I spent the last 30 years working on political reform. And it is something that's very difficult. Political reform normally, when we talk about groups like the BGA, Better Government Association, which does a very good job, investigative reporting, it's all about bad apples. We got bad people that corrupt the system. We need to put the bad apples in jail. And it's very difficult to go and convince the people who are benefiting from the political system that it's a systemic problem and that we really need change, that it's not just bad apples. One of my favorite phrases in terms of this is, just because the people running the whorehouse are celibate doesn't mean that it isn't a whorehouse. Now, sometimes the people running the whorehouse are whores, but that's a different discussion. And so this is not about bad apples. This is a systemic problem. So I worked with a group that was trying to get campaign finance reform and disclosure, and we had in 2009 we got that done. We got contribution limits. We got a huge increase in disclosure. But we ended up with weak limits, strong disclosure, because we were up against the Illinois political system. The legislative leaders are incredibly powerful within this system, and they really benefit from the campaign finance laws. And there was no way that the legislative leaders were going to allow us to we're going to pass a bill that would have restricted their power to raise money. And the other thing that you need if you're going to try and affect change, in addition to working from the outside, you've got to have allies from the inside. When you're trying to really solve problems, American political system just doesn't work very well. And that is a huge problem right now in Illinois. We've got incredibly powerful leaders and a very weak chief executive. In fact, we probably haven't had a functioning chief executive in Illinois since about 2007. And you could probably argue maybe that to go all the way back to the third year of the Ryan administration, where you've really had a governor that makes a difference. And legislatures are not great institutions for leading, for governing and leading. Legislatures are not designed to function that way. Without balance, without a strong chief executive, it's very difficult to get things done, because legislatures like to cut up the pie, and they're worried about the next election, and they can't speak for the whole of the state of Illinois. So, what we ended up in 2009 was a pretty weak contribution limits bill. How weak? Well, we have limits on contributions, but if you self-fund or have independent expenditures over $250,000, the limits come off. The limits come off if any candidate in either party in the primary or the general exceeds those limits. So there will be no contribution limits in the next governor's race, of which Pat Quinn and Bill Brady spent $36 million trying to be governor the last go around. And not only that, but part of the thing about changing, getting contribution limits was to have not allow the governor to take $25,000 checks, which the governor Rod Blagojevich was essentially selling the state at about $25,000 a throw. Well, once the contributions limits come off in the next governor's race, they come off for the whole election cycle, which lasts until December 31st. So whoever gets elected governor in November of 2014 will be able to accept unlimited campaign contributions from anybody who wants to establish a warm personal relationship with the new governor. You can imagine that if you have backed the wrong horse in the general, you might want to make it up to the governor going into the next session. So we ended up with very weak contribution limits because we couldn't beat the legislative leaders and we couldn't get the governor engaged in the process. And that's, now that's, before I move to the next thing, which is to chat a little bit about the policy process, I have to get up on my soapbox briefly, okay? Because I've been at this for a long time, and you can make a difference, and it is worth it. And one of the things that you have to understand when you're trying to, we're all sitting here, and I'm an annuitant like everybody else, wondering, what are they going to do to my health care on the 1st of January, and what happens to my COLA. If you're going to be engaged in the process, you have to understand the process, and you have to respect the process. You have to respect the people. You don't have to agree with the outcomes, but it's all that we got. It is a representative democracy. And in a representative democracy, we make decisions on the basis of action. People vote in elections. They vote in the legislature. Governors sign or they don't sign bills. It's not the best science wins. It's not whoever has the best cost-benefit analysis. We make policy on the basis of action through representative democracy. And action means interaction, and interaction means influence. And so what I tell my friends in the reform community all the time when they say, oh, it's just politics. We didn't get it done because of politics. And what I tell them is when political reformers, and this really goes for everybody, fail, they don't fail because of politics, they fail at politics. This is the only game in town. If you don't win, then it isn't because of politics. It's because you weren't good enough at playing politics. And so you have to understand and you have to respect the process. Okay, I'm back off the soapbox here. But I just, I think, I deal with reformers who are offended by the process. That's just nuts. How can you be offended by politics and then be interested in political reform? Again, this is the only game in town. It's about government. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What's the next sentence? Yes, to ensure those rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. It's the only game in town. If you have to make politics work, you have to make democracy work. I got back on my soapbox, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's talk about, so we've got a process that tends to be distributive, let's make a deal. Public interest is kind of who's got 6 votes on a Tuesday night kind of stuff. And it's difficult when you look at this stuff from the outside to kind of outside or inside, to get a handle on why do things turn out the way that they do. And we've got, it's either nobody knows what's going on, or it's all planned. It's all part of this giant conspiracy that's going on. And so I'm sitting here thinking about what they're doing to my pension and my health care, and I'm thinking, who am I dealing with? Is it Darth Vader? Or is it Otter from Animal House? Now, Empire Strikes Back. We go to the, Darth Vader has a deal with Lando Calrissian to turn over Luke Skywalker. Lando believes that he's going to be able to take the Wookiee and Princess Leia with him. And Darth Vader says, take them to my ship. And Lando Calrissian says, but we had a deal. And Darth Vader looks at him and says, I am altering the bargain. Pray I do not alter it further. So are we dealing with Darth Vader or a bunch of drunken frat boys? What's going on down at the General Assembly? Sometimes I think it's a little mixture of both. Okay, so, but there are some realities down there, and there are a couple of realities. One of them has to do with the legislative leaders. And they are incredibly strong, and they're incredibly strong. If you know this, great. If you don't, I think it's important to go through this just briefly. Legislative leaders are incredibly strong because they dominate the process. They dominate the process in terms of the legislative rules, what gets called, what doesn't get called, how the committees are configured. The Speaker only cares about 2 votes. Elect me Speaker and vote for my rules. Woe be unto the Democrat who wants to quibble with the Speaker about Madigan's rules, which used to be Pate Phillips' rules. So the leaders dominate the political process in Springfield. One of the ways they dominate the political process is that all of the staff that works in Springfield works for the legislative leaders. A congressman is a small enterprise. You get resources for an office in your district, an office in the Capitol. You've got people who are concerned about your welfare, about making you look good, about writing press releases, drafting bills, doing research. All those people exist at the state Capitol, but they all work for the legislative leaders, they don't work for the individual members. So the leaders have a monopoly on staff. Because the leaders dominate the process, the leaders raise huge amounts of money from people who care about whether it's an R or a D that runs the General Assembly, and people that don't care. A top 5 contributor to top 10, top 5 contributor, depending on the cycle, is the beer distributors. Right up there with unions and Chamber of Commerce and a whole bunch of other groups. Not a lot of hot beer issues in the General Assembly, but they want to be left alone. If you know anything about beer distributors, it's a pretty sweet deal if you own a distributorship. They want to preserve the status quo. They want to be friends with whoever is in power. So when the Republicans controlled the Senate, beer money was 60-40 Republican. And after Emil Jones took control of the Senate, the Democrats, after the 2002 election, in the 2004 cycle, beer money was 60-40 Democrat in the Senate. Not because they'd had some kind of ideological conversion, but because they give money to leaders, they give money to incumbents, they give more money to the people that have the gavel. The Democrats had the gavel, they had more members, and so they got more money than the Republicans. And so leaders raise money from people who care, and people that don't care, who controls the process. So you've got this situation in Springfield where the leaders dominate. Then in elections, the leaders dominate. I mean, last time around they drew the maps, but even beyond that, the leaders raise money and funnel that into campaigns. They run campaigns by having their people who are on these partisan staffs go off the payroll and become and are part of election organizations. The legislative leaders control election machinery that exists from election to election that has no loyalty to a particular candidate. If a Republican candidate is doing bad in Peoria and another one's doing well in Quincy, on Saturday there's money and staff in Peoria, and on Monday there's money and staff in Quincy. There's no loyalty. Congressman's campaign gets into trouble, the people working for the congressman, that money, the staff, they got nowhere to go. You're just going to ride it to the end. So the leaders have huge impact on elections, both by money and by staff. So what's happened over time, you're stronger in Springfield, makes you stronger in elections. Stronger in elections makes you stronger in Springfield. The leaders are the political parties. You cannot find the Democrat and Republican Party in Springfield down at the State House, but you can find the Mike Madigan Party, the Tom Cross Party, the John Collerton Party, and the Christine Rodogno Party. What do parties do? They recruit candidates, they raise money, they run campaigns, and they get out the vote, and they organize government. So the parties, political parties the leaders are the political parties, which is why under the campaign finance law, the money there are no limits on parties in terms of raising and spending money. And legislative caucuses controlled by the 4 legislative leaders, legislative caucus committees are political parties. Now, John Collerton or Don Harmon and I could have a big philosophical argument about what is or isn't a political party. But the reality is, they are the political parties. So they dominate the process. And what used to be the case in Illinois when we had strong governors is you had some balance in the process. Because the office of the governor in Illinois is incredibly powerful. It is on paper. The veto power, the executive reorganization power. We wrote the Illinois Constitution in 1970, pre-Watergate. This was an era in which we loved strong chief executives, and we didn't think government could function without a strong chief executive. Watergate kind of disabused both practitioners and political scientists of some of those feelings about the need to have strong executives. But the Illinois Constitution created an incredibly powerful office in the office of the governor. It's hard not to be powerful if you're governor. Dan Walker figured it out. Rod Blagojevich eventually figured it out, how to not be powerful. And Pat Quinn seemed to start at the bottom, and then it wasn't kind of he pretty much came into office functioning that way. I mean, it is, you have to, if you're going to use the office of the governor beyond the formal powers, you have to be able to leverage the powers of the office. You have to come in with an electoral mandate. You have to be able to use the office to help people and hurt people. And that's what good governors do. They don't always hurt people, they don't always help people, but it's credible that they can do that. And governors exercise those kinds of powers. And Pat Quinn's problem is that nobody wants his help and nobody's afraid of it. I mean, that's just the reality of what's going on. And when you don't have a functioning chief executive, then you've got a leadership vacuum. And when you have legislative leaders being the only people that are making policy, then it's difficult to get a bigger perspective in terms of outcomes. And so I'm going to get wonky and talk about something that is missing from the pension discussions down in Springfield that a governor ought to worry about. And that is, what are the long-term implications of the state of Illinois becoming a really lousy employer? If you cannot, if working for the state, which used to be a good deal, is no longer a good deal, if you can't get the best and the brightest to work for government, then how do you staff DCFS? How do you staff the Department of Corrections? You know, if you can't give people pension benefits, then you're going to have to make it up in salaries or something else to make it attractive. This is basic labor economics. I mean, and so, we are in the process of really diminishing the workforce and diminishing the quality of employment throughout the state. And it's also going to have the same kind of impact on education, local government. And you need somebody that is looking long term, or you need voices that are saying, it's not just about the next election, and it's not just about whether we're avoiding or going to get this tax increase or not get the tax increase. It's about, how do we govern? How do we make the system work? And those discussions are just not taking place. Instead, we're, where we are. There's another saying that is about where I am at pensions at this point, which is, better a horrible ending than horrors without end. And I'm to the point now where it's just going to wake me when it's over. Tell me what's going to happen. So it isn't that, governors ought to be strong, and they ought to be an equal partner, and the system works best when you've got that kind of balance. And you've got you got people that are thinking about what's going on in the district, and you've got people that are thinking about long-term what should be going on in terms of the state. And I'm afraid that either outcome, whether you get Collerton's bill or Madigan's bill, that none of that is going to deal with the systemic problems in terms of the budget, and none of that is going to address what do we do about building the capacity of people that provide governmental services, building that capacity back up in the state. Those questions are just not being asked, and that's what I did for 30 years, and what you guys, all of you, have done for long periods of time. And that is, that's something that has to be reintroduced back into the equation. I'm happy to talk about almost anything people want to talk about. It's pretty clear that we're now going to have a conference committee to deal with pensions. Give me a break. Conference committee is a parliamentary device that allows both chambers to put a piece of legislation in a process where they can resolve their differences. It's used in all kinds of different variations. We used to use it all the time in Illinois, although that involved getting a lot of individual members engaged with making decisions, which the leaders decided that since we're going to make the decisions anyway, that's not very efficient, and that we should deal with amending bills back and forth and doing budget implementation bills and BIMPs and all of that sort of stuff. So conference committee is nothing other than a parliamentary kind of a device. Madigan and Collerton are not going to cede their power to the 10 members that are appointed to this committee. it's kind of, it's 10 to nothing, and the no's have it if you haven't convinced the leaders that something gets done. And so what this does is allow the legislature to look like they're doing something, and therefore there was a reason for them to come to town. Now, again, you got to remember back where I was on my soapbox about you got to get engaged with government and it's all worth it. But stuff like this makes it very difficult because it's clearly, nothing's going to happen other than, we're going to come back to deal with whatever the governor decides to do with concealed carry. And, when Collerton and Madigan have an agreement, something will happen. Nothing will happen until then. So, at any rate, I'm happy to answer questions if people have, if I haven't anybody that I've offended, I'll try to make up for it. Yes.
How effective is the Paul Simon Policy Institute in the reform movement?
Okay, there are two answers to that. David Yepsen does a really good job of getting information out about, and their polling stuff is great. The policy stuff that they work on. Now, effective is, there's one level of that which is raising public awareness and understanding, and they're very good at that. The hard part is how do you impact policy without becoming a partisan. And that isn't really what they're about. And so I'm not faulting them in terms of what they do. Now, I talk about conflicts of interest. Obviously, I have had an appointment within Institute for Government and Public Affairs, and I see Bob Rich down there. So, that's the more difficult thing is how do you get policy into the process? How do you have an impact on people who are making decisions? And that's a much more difficult. And the Simon Institute has not defined their role that way. So Illinois Issues is a great vehicle in terms of getting things out to opinion leaders, but it doesn't shape policy down at the State House. So how do you take what's at the university and put it into the process in a way that improves the quality of the decision making? And that's the difficult thing. That's always a work in progress. The universities ought to be about that in whatever your discipline is, but I think that there's an awful lot of aversion to politics. And it's really a misunderstanding of how policy gets made. It's not the best science. It's not speaking truth to power. I can speak truth to the speaker all the time. That's not going to get, I don't think that's going to move things very far. Anyone else want to chat? Yes.
It seems that you agree that too much power is concentrated in the hands of the speaker. How do we change that?
The speaker will not live forever. No. And so, okay. I'm sorry. So you deserve a non-flippant response, and I apologize. The speaker is one vote, and the speaker is, he serves at the pleasure of his caucus, and the members of his caucus serve at the pleasure of voters. And so this is not, you got to be in it for the long term. I'm not a fan of term limits under any circumstances, because I just, that's essentially giving up on democratic theory, which is that engaged, informed citizens can make decisions. Now, I can do chapter and verse on how much campaigns cost and how difficult it is for people to win and all of those things. But, the dirty little secret about money, just to do a non sequitur here, is that if we took, I think Mike Malvin's figures are, if we increase the number of people make small contributions from 3% to 7%, you would overwhelm big money with little money. So New York State is working on how do we encourage small donors. New York City's doing it. Now they're going to try it out at the governor's level. So this is long-term sorts of things. That how do you take, you got to empower members, because members need resources and they need staff. I have a friend in the Policy Institute, which is a very conservative think tank, and she spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. And, she says one of the things that really frustrates me about Illinois is we don't have enough professional staff, and we don't have, there's not the expertise working for the members. And then I say, so then we should increase the budget of the General Assembly. And I lose her there every time. And so, it isn't a simple answer. I mean, he's one individual, but John Collerton aspires to have the kind of power that Mike Madigan has, as does Tom Cross. Well, Tom Cross wants to maybe be Attorney General because he's tired of being in a minority position. But so I don't think, it is about one individual, but it's also systemic. It's about the non-engagement and people taking control of the process. I'm going to throw another one at you. Rod Blagojevich won election with slightly less than 20% of the eligible voters. He got reelected. And Judy Bart Topinka got about the votes of about 18% of the eligible voters. So who do we blame for Rod Blagojevich? The 19% that voted for him, or the more than 60% of the eligible voters that passed on that election? So, those are the difficult questions, is how do you get people who spend all of their time on Twitter and Facebook, and, I'm one of the reasons I'm kind of nervous about doing online classes, which I'm going to do. One thing I like about the idea of online classes is that I don't have to watch people at the back of the room, Googling me on their laptops and texting their friends and everything else that's going on. So I don't think this is easy. But Madigan is, it's not bad apples. I mean, Madigan is the epitome of the Illinois process. But the weakness of a Madigan is you cannot tell me what his 5 public policy goals are. What does Mike Madigan care about? I had somebody call me and say, what's the legacy of the speaker? What has he achieved? Well, he's achieved being speaker 28 of the last 30 years. That's what speakers do. We don't, speakers of the House are not people that, you've got to collectively work through the legislature, and governors have to lead. So that's a way long, insufficient argument. I'm not unsympathetic to people that say, we need to term limit these people. But I'm still I think that's giving up on the democratic process. I think that, if we don't truly believe that engaging in civic activity ennobles the individual and improves the outcome of the process, then I think we probably should try a different system. So I'm being really preachy tonight, and I apologize for that. Okay. Anything? Yeah, Dick.
I don't disagree with a lot of what Kent Redfield has said, and he and I have known each other for a long time. But I would not want anybody to leave being discouraged about participation. Because the antidote to a lot of money and a lot of politically powerful people at work is involvement by people in this room. And you doing what you need to do with your friends and your family, because that is the best antidote to the kind of political powerhouses that Ken has been talking about. So I wouldn't want anybody to leave here and think you are powerless. You have a great organization here, you have great leadership, and you need to stick together and not feel like you're powerless. You are not powerless.
Yeah. And people win in Springfield all the time because they're the only voice there. And if a legislator hears, let's do something, and nobody objects, then legislators like to vote for people. They don't like to vote against people. And so if you're organized, if you're there, you have a huge advantage over people who are not organized, who aren't there. If you make campaign contributions, and this organization does and has raised its visibility significantly, then you get people's attention and people take you seriously within the process. You know, you don't have to outspend the Illinois Education Association or the trial lawyers or the hospital association, but you have to show people that you're serious, that you've got an organization, that you can bring all kinds of things to the table and make a difference in the district, because that's where your best lobbying takes place, not in Springfield. You know, it's about being able to interact and influence people. You know, if you've lobbied someone in the district, then you don't have to lobby them in Springfield the same way as if it's a cold case, you know, cold call sort of situation. So yeah, I mean, it's showing up, it's being there that is so important, because people lose all the time because they don't know that they needed to be here, and there's no organization to bring their voice there, and that's so critical. Somebody in the back had a yes.
So are you saying that this, getting back to the pension reform, we're going to reform this now with a conference committee, and Cleo wants something on his desk to vote, wants him to put something on his desk, and that's what's going to be a resolution by this conference committee?
Okay, yes to the second, which is, at least unless the governor changes the way that he operates, the governor is really interested in having and signing a pension bill. And he is not totally disinterested about the content, but, you know, I have a friend whose phrase is, I care, but not that much. And so so that's true. The governor, the first campaign finance contribution limits bill, the governor loved, testified in favor of. Then when we put pressure on him, he got together the legislative leaders and had a bill vetoing ceremony, vetoed their own bill. But then he was happy to sign whatever came out of the process. He was a pretty disinterested participant. So the governor can't have a huge impact, and he really needs a win. So he's not gonna do anything to throw down in a way that makes it more difficult to get a solution. Now, conference committee, again, is symbolic. That's window dressing. There are a dozen ways, if you've got an agreement, to get a bill past both chambers and on the governor's desk. So the conference committee is just a flurry of activity that says, we're here and we did something. We set up a conference committee, and there'll be lots of people, lots of reporters will be wondering who got on the committee, who didn't get on the committee. Doesn't really make any difference. It's going to be, if we get in, Madigan or Collerton are going to have to modify their position so that they can get something that can get 60 votes and 30 votes, or I don't discount the idea that if they could get something that had an immediate effective date. That looks less likely, but at any rate, it's not, the agreement has to come from Collerton and Madigan. It's not going to be about 10 legislators putting them in a room and suddenly they're going to have an epiphany about, my tongue won't work tonight, about how we solve this process, and everybody goes, wow, why didn't we think of that? That's just not going to happen. So it's just, there was no reason to come to town without a deal, because special sessions are just lousy. If the intention is to bring people to Springfield and kind of sweat them out till they get an agreement, that historically has never worked. You call a special session to fix a problem, or you call a special session to ratify an agreement. And so, maybe we'll be back with an agreement. But it will be about Madigan and Collerton coming to some kind of understanding that they can sell to their respective caucuses. It won't be about the governor, and it won't be about the 10 members that are on the conference committee. That's just not, that's not the reality. Yes?
You see any chance that the long-term impacts, negative impacts on the best and the brightest that you've talked about, both at the state level and for higher education, elementary, secondary, will ever get worked into the equation?
It will take a governor who cares about governing and understands that, has a commitment to providing services and understands that he needs to have good people managing an agency, and he needs to have competent people that can deliver us the services at that level. And, Jim Thompson, and I don't know who that is. Jim Thompson, managed the U.S. Attorney's Office. There was nothing in the background, particularly that would have told you this person is going to be not only a strong leader, but someone who understands the importance of getting good people to run agencies and then letting them run the agencies. And that was really, so you could name the people that were agency directors under Thompson. I don't know who runs. I know a couple of people personally that run agencies for under the current administration. But no, I mean it's also going to take a push from there's an academic, intellectual, university argument to make in terms of public administration that has to be made about if you're going to commit to providing services, you've got to have enough resources, and you've got to have competent people, and you've got to attract them, and you've got to retain them. And if you eviscerate the pension system and you end up with contracts meaning nothing in terms of collective bargaining, I mean, that's just, so there's an awful lot of damage to undo. But if people, if you've got to have leaders, both legislative leaders, but particularly you've got to have a governor who says, we need to make government work, and to make government work, we've got to have good people at the top, and we've got to attract and retain good people to perform the services. And, that's, so yes, I think that, there's going to be a swing backwards to that. Now, it's clearly there are people out there who are pushing pension reform who basically want to destroy public employees. Their attitude is if government does something well, that just encourages people to think that government can actually do something. And therefore, we don't want to have good people work for government because we don't want government to succeed. And those are dangerous attitudes that are out there, and you have to recognize them and you have to confront them, because again, if you make a commitment for whatever governmental services, then that's implicitly you're saying this is worth doing, it's worth doing well, and there's a role for government to play in terms of that. And you can't do that on the cheap. You can't do that with underfunding and understaffing. I mean, it's, again, I despair in the short term for what we've done to public employment in this state. But I'm also, again, I haven't spent 30 years working on campaign finance reform in Illinois, not to be an optimist. So you have to know that there's that part of me too. But I think that you got to get people to acknowledge it and to commit at a number of different levels to get it on the agenda and to make sure people understand how important it is. Oh. Okay, you should have got it. Okay.
You're watching the Illinois Channel. an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.